Welcome to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. Today we are on location in Riverbank, California at Yota1 Performance. And what we're going to show you how to do is rebuild an R150F manual transmission that came in 1st Gen Tacomas, 3rd Gen 4Runners, and the R150 model transmission came in other vehicles like later model 1st Gen 4Runners, 2nd Gen 4Runners, and the two-wheel drive versions of the 1st Gen Tacoma and 3rd Gen 4Runner. Also, this video will help you rebuild the R151 model that came on the turbo models of the 86 and 87 pickups. So we're going to show you all the steps that you need to do to rebuild one of these transmissions. Nick is going to walk you through everything, show you all the specialty tools, the whole 9 yards. So you'll be able to walk away knowing how to rebuild your manual transmission, which in my opinion is pretty damn cool of him to be willing to share this tech with the online community. Thank you, Nick, for being willing to share this with everybody. We're going to show you the process Yota1 goes through to rebuild a manual transmission. So it's not simply tear it down and use some brake cleaner and some brushes and rags and clean it up. They do a whole lot more to prep everything to make the finished product really sweet. If you are going to use Yota1 to rebuild your manual transmission, in a perfect world, they're going to have a unit in stock that they can rebuild and paint it, and it's going to look perfect. They're going to ship it to you in a specialty box, and then you can pull your transmission. You could throw the rebuilt one in you got from Yota1, and then you could use the same box to ship back your transmission to satisfy the core charge. Most of the time, Nick has a pretty good supply of transmissions, so what you'll have to do is just give them a call and see where they're at, and hopefully they're going to have one in stock that they can rebuild, ship to you, and it's going to be much better for you. One final thing I want to say is you're going to notice that the bell housing is already off the transmission, and that's because it has nothing to do with the rebuilding of the transmission. You need to get it out of your way. So when you get your transmission out, you're first going to want to remove the shift fork and boot with the throwout bearing. Remove that whole assembly. And then you're going to come in here with a ratchet or an impact gun, and there's 9 bolts around the perimeter here, and you're just going to zip those out. It's probably going to be stuck on there a little bit, so you'll tap it with a rubber or plastic mallet, and you'll separate the bell housing from the transmission. If you're going to be sending a transmission to Yota1 Performance to have them rebuild it, that's what they expect. They don't want the bell housing, they just want the main transmission. All right. We're going to get started with the teardown of this R150F transmission.
Okay, we're going to start with the stuff that we really don't need when we rebuild the transmission, but sometimes is on it. We appreciate it if that stuff gets taken off before you send it in. If it doesn't, it's not that big a deal. This bracket is always one. There's that bracket. This is the reverse indicator. We have these for sale if you want a new one, but they almost never die. Now we're going to take out the drain plug. Now we'll take out the fill plug. Now we're going to take off the front bearing retainer and seal housing. This is a 12 millimeter. That's where the input seal is. We want to get that out of the way so it gets clean in there.
Nick used a heel bar to get that input shaft seal out.
Now we're going to pull the snap rings off of the input and counter shaft. I'm just using standard snap ring pliers. I use 2 different ones. These are really nice because of the square. They grab really well, but they're kind of wide. I use these where these don't fit. They're a lot narrower.
We're using a buck knife to help get it off.
One of my main tools. Now we're going to lay the transmission down and take off a few more things. Now we're going to pull this off. This is the vent tube between the T-case and the trans. A couple different configurations of that, but that's how this one works. Now we're going to take out this 12 millimeter bolt that holds the shift shoe to the shift rod. 12 millimeter. Now we're gonna take out these two plungers. They're a 24 millimeter. Most Toyota transmissions use a crush washer like this that was on the sensor and same size as the oil fill and drain, but the R150F does not use a crush washer here. Now we're gonna take out the interlocks, the plug springs and interlocks. We have to remove this one bolt. This bracket's in that interlock. So now we're gonna remove all these detent, ball, spring, and plugs. There's 5 of them total.
Are they also called interlocks?
The interlocks are in between the rails. These are detents. We're gonna use this impact driver to avoid stripping out these Allen heads. It's 6 mil Allen. If you're using this for an earlier R150, those are a Torx, not an Allen.
So if you tried to get on there with a standard ratchet or impact, you would strip it.
Now this one right here, you don't have to take that out. There's the reverse lockout mechanism in there. There's a roll pin down inside there. That is a 3/16 roll pin, and that holds the reverse lockout mechanism in place. You really don't have to take that out. We do here because we sandblast everything, so we take every single piece out. You can drive that roll pin down. You just need to be careful. Make sure you get it out of there and it doesn't get lost.
So you could see that roll pin that he's going to punch out.
Okay, so we're going to use this magnet. It's just a small head magnet on a copper wire. Now we're going to pull out the springs and detent balls. On this one, there is no spring and detent ball on the very lower plug. It's just a plug. There's nothing behind it. But these other 3 there is. And it's the same spring and same ball, so you don't need to worry about getting them mixed up. Same with the other plug that we pulled out back here. On this transmission, all the plugs are the same, and in this area, all 3 of these springs and detent balls are the same.
So there's the spring, and then that's the detent ball right there.
That's it. 3 springs and 3 balls are all the same. So now we're gonna undo the main bolts that hold the cases to the center plate. They're 14 millimeter, and a half drive wobble socket is really awesome to use.
Are those all the same length?
They're all the same length. Yeah, they're 10-125 by 80 millimeter, and there's 10 of them.
Nice. That makes it easy.
That usually does not happen that easy.
It's usually harder.
Oh yeah, that was probably the easiest transmission I've ever cracked open. And we didn't do that ahead of time for the video. We just got lucky. Okay, so now the front case is off. There's really nothing left to do to this. It's ready to be cleaned and machined. So we're gonna set it off to the side. And then we're gonna pull the rear out. And at that point, the shift rod and the shift shoe are gonna be loose. And then look, there's our roll pin that came out of that reverse lockout. Now we're gonna push this to the side for a minute. Now a couple things on the rear case. This is the reverse lockout. I'll show you more about it when we assemble. You know how you can't go from fifth to reverse? That's because of this piece right here. So we want it out of here. You can see how nasty this is inside. So that usually just pulls right out. Sometimes you gotta put a bar on it. It just pops out. And then here is the 5th gear oiler. That oiler, it collects oil and it feeds it into the end of the counter shaft to oil 5th gear.
So right in here.
Yep, right through that hole.
Okay.
And it's just a simple little plastic piece. They're totally reusable, but they're also $5. If yours is broken, we have them. We're gonna take that breather out of there, and I don't really have a special tool for it, but a 8mm socket works really good. We also have these new breathers available. There's a little spring and a piece of rubber in there underneath this cap. A lot of times those are broken off. So if yours is in good shape, there's really not a huge reason to replace it, but if it's broken, they are available. So now we're done with the rear case. We need to get this stuff back to Clint to start getting this clean.
We have the front and rear cases off. Now they're gonna go into the parts washer and they're gonna get nice and clean. Here's the bell housing, and the alignment of the bell housing to the front case is done with two dowel pins. One of them is in the bell housing right here, and then the other dowel pin hole is right here. Ideally, you want the dowel pins to stay in the front case and not come with the bell housing, because when you go to put the bell housing onto the front case, this is a through hole right here, as opposed the hole for the dowel in the front case is not a through hole. So you could go to join the two parts and this dowel pin pushes through and you don't realize it. If that happens and you only have one dowel pin, that causes a gross misalignment and you could totally destroy your transmission as a result. What Nick suggests you do is you remove the dowel pin from the bell housing and you reinsert it back into the front case. So he's going to drive this out right now. It drives out pretty easily.
Punch and hammer. And later we'll put two dowel pins back into the case when we're assembling the transmission. So the first thing we're gonna do before we take any of the guts apart is go through and make a couple of marks just to make reassembly quicker and easier. We're gonna mark the forward position of both of the shift forks as well as the sliders. This is a little Blue Point 70,000 RPM pencil grinder. They're absolutely amazing. They're a couple $100. They might have a cheaper version, but I use this for a lot of stuff. So all the marks that we're gonna do are gonna just point forward. So now we're gonna mark the 3 transmission sliders. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna disassemble in here is we're gonna remove the output shaft bearing from the output shaft. First have to take this snap ring off, and then we'll use a puller to pull that bearing off. Okay, this is not your typical snap ring. You can see one end of it's here, one end of it's here. So there's really no pliers that are gonna do anything for you. We're gonna use 2 equal length flat screwdrivers, and we're gonna catch the snap ring with a rag because it'll go flying across the room. So we just kind of set it up like that. We're gonna turn the flat screwdrivers outward like that. We're gonna just set the screwdrivers on there and see how they come up. They're basically flat.
So what Nick said is you have to have 2 screwdrivers the same length, so when you strike with the mallet, it's gonna contact both handles at the same time.
That's it. That would have hit the bench and then probably hit the ceiling, and we would have been looking for it for a half an hour. There's also a very similar snap ring. It's smaller, but it's wide. You can see the tips are way out here. So we're gonna do the same thing there. This one I don't have anything to hang on, so I'm just gonna wad some rags up. And there's the other one. Pretty easy to tell apart. One's big, one's small. So here we're gonna pull this bearing off.
As you can see, Nick has a pretty big fancy puller, but you could probably do this with a smaller puller than this, or maybe a 2-jaw puller.
Now we're gonna remove the 5th gear retainer plate using a standard gear puller. There's 8x125 threads, 2 threaded holes right there. Works perfect. There's a synchro assembly back behind this, so if you're not planning on replacing synchros, definitely be careful. You don't have to thread that in very far.
So if you thread the bolts in too far, you'll hit the synchro?
Yeah, make sure that's even. Now we're gonna remove the 5th gear fork. It's a 3/32 roll pin right there. Roll pin punches are pretty cool.
It's a special roll pin punch. It has that little nipple on the end of it that goes inside the roll pin.
There's the roll pin. Okay, now we're gonna pull part of the 5th gear assembly off. So that's the fork. And then this is the 3-piece synchro assembly right here. We'll go over this when we reassemble it with new synchros. Now we can pull off the rest of 5th gear. So this is just a sleeve spacer. Those usually just slide right off. That's kind of weird, but it's stubborn. And there's the split bearing that goes inside of the gear, goes on the shaft. This will get reused, so save it. That's 5th gear counter side, and that's 5th gear main shaft side. Now the next things that we're gonna do is move back to the front side of the transmission, and we're gonna pull all these rails out. These are 10mm bolts. Sometimes they're 12, this one's 10. So now we're gonna remove these clips. They're just like the ones we removed a little while ago where they're real wide. You're not gonna use pliers. So you can use the 2 same screwdrivers that you used for the bigger snap rings back here. We have a tool for it, but you can use the 2 flat screwdrivers. We're gonna use the Yota1 14mm clip remover.
Specialty tool.
Yeah, the screwdrivers get kind of annoying on these little guys. We're gonna shove some rags in there so the clips don't go flying. Gonna get them both pointed up. Gonna put your 2 screwdrivers right on the tips of the clip and just pop it off. There's that little tiny clip. Super important. They have to go back on. Those are your stoppers. Those come up and stop the rail against the case. There's one other one. Okay, so the next thing that we're gonna do is pull out all these rails. If you look, all the rails are right in a line. So this is the main bore line that goes all the way down to the bottom rail. There's interlock pins in between all these. So you need to keep track of them, know they're there, and you have to start at the top. This is the top of the transmission with the output shaft, and you got the main top hole. We've already taken the detent ball and spring and plug out of here. So this one should just slide right out. And it does. Slides out towards the rear. There's nothing special going on here. This rail just pulls right out. We can now take the fork off. You can do a quick look to see if the fork has wear. It doesn't, it looks good. We'll show you one that's worn out in a different clip. So now we're gonna use our long magnet because I don't know if you can see or not. Look down in there, see that ball bearing down there? We're gonna slide right through here with the magnet and just grab that. Let's give them a measurement on that. So we'll go in millimeters, 9.5mm by 13.5mm long. So now we should be able to pull this rail out. Sometimes they don't like to just come right out. Now you see that pin that just fell? That goes in that hole. Pin goes inside the rail like that. It's part of the interlock system and it's gonna fall out. So let's give them a measurement on that too. 4.8mm by 11.3 long. Now we can finish pulling that rail out. Now we can grab this fork. Looks pretty good.
Now with these shift rods and forks, can you mix them up if you're not careful or?
No, I'll show you. It's a different fork. See how that's slotted?
Oh, okay, it's different.
That one only fits on there, that one only fits on there. And 5th was a steel fork. So on this one, you really can't mix them up.
Okay. So there's another little ball down there he's gonna remove with the magnet?
It's the same as the last interlock. Same dimensions.
Okay.
So there's another snap ring right here. When reverse is engaged, I have reverse pulled out over here. You can't move that rod. That snap ring stopper is up against it. But if you take reverse out, then you can slide that rod and then you can get access to that spring. We just messed with the reverse gear a little bit and with the 5th rail until we gained access to that snap ring groove right there. And we'll go back to the fancy Yota1 clip remover not really a good way to put a rag in there, so there it is. Now that rail will come out. Okay, there's going to be one more.
There's one more ball in there.
Yep. Have to
There it is.
Move that back and forth. There you go. Another one, same exact one. So now we're going to take out the reverse assembly. It's this rail here. Oh, sorry, we got one more ball we forgot to take out right there, down in that hole. It's going to be just a 9.5 millimeter round ball.
Another detent ball right there.
Mm-hmm. Interlock.
Interlock ball.
9.5 millimeter round ball. Same as the ones that you took out earlier out of the plugs. Now we're going to knock this guy out of here. Pull that mechanism out of there. Now there's something right here that you have to be really careful of. There's a spring and ball inside here that you really can't get to unless you pull this rod all the way out. It's pretty difficult to put it back together if you do. There's not really a big reason to take it apart. We do, but you don't really need to. So here's one thing you got to be real careful for. This hole right here, if you were to line that hole up with this piece and pull that in there, that ball that's inside of there would lock into that shaft, and this part's garbage. You'll never get it out. There's no access to it. No matter what you do, don't let that ball go into that hole.
Or you're going to be spending money on parts.
Yeah, we fixed it one time by drilling a hole in here, and we stuck a piece of welding rod in there and just hit the gun real quick and grabbed that ball and pulled it back and then pulled the thing apart and then pushed it through, cut it off, replaced the ball. We didn't have another one, and they're expensive.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
Now we're going to go back to the other side of the transmission, back to a 12 millimeter socket, and we're going to take these 4 center bearing retainer bolts out. Now this plate will come off. Now that plate also captures the reverse gear shaft. That shaft could just come out of there now.
This is the reverse gear shaft?
This is the reverse idler and the reverse idler shaft.
Okay.
If this transmission wasn't gummy, it would just slide right out. When that just comes off, there's nothing there, just a shaft and a gear. So there's a plate right here that usually comes right off. And then right there, there's a little retainer, a little outward bevel on the bottom, and it's flat on the top. So the bevel goes in the hole and the flat goes out. And on this little plate, there's a notch there. I don't know what that notch is for, but that's the notch that goes all the way through that captures that plate like that. Now we're gonna remove the snap ring from the center plate bearing on the main shaft. Just simply take the snap ring off. Now that we've done that, we're ready to disassemble this thing. So if you can pull that out, pull it out, it makes it easier, but that one don't want to come out. So we're gonna try to get the weight off of this just a little bit. And I'm just gonna tap that shaft out, give that one a couple taps to match. Just keep going. You don't want to just drive one shaft because you see the front of the counter is hitting that bearing. So you just kind of work them together and it'll do that. As soon as it does that, you can take the counter shaft out of the way.
This is the counter shaft?
Yep. This is the main shaft assembly.
Okay.
And we'll come right back to those. See that bearing just slid right out. So sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Get that bearing out of there. That's not being reused. And then we have a couple pieces left. You don't need to take this off, but we do just for cleaning purposes. That's what the reverse fork pivots on. It's 2 12 millimeter bolts.
What is this piece called?
That's the center plate.
Center plate, okay.
Yeah. You can see the magnet, see all that funk?
That's all metal debris?
Yep. Get that magnet out of there.
So based off of that much metal debris, would you say this thing needed to be rebuilt?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
It also didn't have a magnetic drain plug in it, so you didn't have a chance for all that metal to continually come out with each oil change. It was just all stuck in there. I typically see a good amount of metal. That's a little more than I would normally see in there. Now that's it for the center plate. It's ready to be cleaned. Okay. I use these boxes for a lot of different things, for pressing and holding gears like this. You probably don't have that, but You can improvise, make something to hold the shaft or have your friend hold it, whatever. So now we're gonna take this bearing off. There's a snap ring right here that holds that bearing on. Now, a few different ways. A lot of guys are gonna use a clamshell like that. We could do that. Let's go ahead and do it. This is what they're gonna be using.
So this is just a standard bearing splitter that you can buy online or just about anywhere, really. So you can see he's got the bearing splitter captured between two press plates on his hydraulic press, and he's going to drive the shaft out of the bearing. And as you can see, he was holding the counter shaft as the bearing was being pressed out, so it didn't drop to the ground and get damaged.
Yeah. All right, so now we've removed our bearing, we're done with the counter shaft, and we're gonna send it over to the cleaning cart.
So nothing more on that counter shaft comes off.
Nope. This is just the back side of the bearing.
What if there was wear on any of those, what do they call them, helical gears?
Yeah. We'll know when it's clean and we do a gear inspection.
But if just one of those gears was bad, could you remove it and replace it, or is the whole shaft have to replace?
No, this is a solid shaft. This is all one piece.
That's all one piece?
Yeah, all one piece.
Jesus Christ, how the hell do they make that?
With a gear cutter?
Magic?
Yeah. Luck, love, and magic like everything else.
That's all one piece. That kind of blows my mind. Okay.
Okay, here we go. We're gonna disassemble the main shaft. First things first, the input shaft is just gonna pull right out. That's it. There's the pocket bearing that's in there. This is gonna get replaced. Synchro ring. And now the first thing we're gonna do is put this shaft down in that hole, and we're gonna go after this snap ring right here. There's the snap ring. There's a really lightweight internal snap ring in here that puts pressure out. These little three things are called synchro keys or dogs. So these little, everywhere you see those synchro keys, you're gonna see one of these light duty snap rings pushing out on those keys. See how they just come in real easy? So it needs those snap rings in there pushing them out. Now we're gonna just pull up on this collar, and those synchro keys are gonna fall out. There's 3 of them, and the snap ring and the collar. Let's just go over real quick what the different gears are. So the input shaft is 4th gear. Right behind that is 3rd, 2nd, 1st. So 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. 5th is back here behind the center plate. It's already been removed. So now we're gonna remove 1st gear in the press. We're gonna just grab it. There's no snap rings or anything in between any of this, so we're gonna use 1st gear to pull off this bearing, which is pressed on, and 5th gear main shaft, which is also, so both of these are pressed on. This gear is not. We're gonna use this gear to pull both of these that are pressed on.
God, I got press envy.
Okay, so there's our 5th gear and our bearing. Notice the collar on one side of 5th gear, that goes down or forward or to the bearing. So now we have this thrust washer. It should just slide right off of there. And there's another one of those, remember that little pin that we pulled out? With the dome on one side, flat on the other,
okay.
Just a little tiny pill. That goes in the shaft and it locks the plate into that.
Where does it go?
There's a little hole right there in the shaft.
Right there. Okay.
Locks right into that notch in that plate. So now we're gonna remove 1st gear. That's it. That's the 1st gear needle bearing.
Okay.
1st gear synchro ring. I'm gonna put those over in the wash bin.
Do the synchros get replaced? The
Yes.
synchro rings?
Yeah. So now we got a plastic ring right here. There's a snap ring under it. It's one of those big wide snap rings. That ring fits inside of there. And this is the thrust surface out here. and right here. That's where, when there's pressure on the gear, those two surfaces push up against each other, called a thrust surface. So this is just in there as a spacer so that needle bearing doesn't ride on that snap ring catching those edges. So snap ring, then the plastic spacer, then the needle bearing.
Is the plastic spacer reusable?
Yes. They're also available if there's anything wrong with it, but it's reusable.
Okay.
If you see these synchro keys down in here, very similar to the ones that were right underneath the input shaft. This is a captured key style, so those don't come out. So we're just gonna pull this collar off, and see those keys are gonna stay in there. There's a spring back behind them, and they're captured. It's hard to see, but there's a little step on the back of that key that captures it into this hub. So those don't need to come out. You can if you want, but they're really tricky to get back in. So now we're gonna take this snap ring off of here. It's just another one of these double flat screwdriver stunts. We have a rag underneath it to protect the gears because we're punching down on it, and to catch that snap ring. There's that snap ring. Now we're gonna remove second gear. That's this gear here. This gear's not pressed on, but this hub's pressed on, and it's pretty tight. So you can see there's not a lot of room to get a bearing splitter, or really anything else for that matter, in there. You could cut a custom hole in a plate that slides over this gear and matches this. You wanna be really careful, whatever you use, not to put any pressure on the tips of the teeth, which is exactly why we don't use a bearing splitter, because it will do that. We use this sleeve that slides over just perfect. See, it clears third gear and it does not contact any of the teeth. So it's just a perfect fit. We'll have these available for sale on our website. Okay, here we go. Okay, so here we go. Here's the 1-2 hub. You'll notice these notches that are only on one side. They're not on this side. That's because of this 3-piece synchro assembly. Those guys go up in these holes, so when you're putting it back together, the slots go down. Nothing we need to take off of here. This has got those spring-loaded keys in it. I'm just gonna leave them in there. I'm gonna take the synchro assembly out. So there's the 3-piece synchro assembly. That's all gonna get replaced. There's our gear. There's our needle roller. That's all there is to it. Next thing we're gonna do is pull off third gear.
So you're gonna use an arbor press on this one, huh?
Nope, this is just a small electric press. But again, same deal. You can't press down on the shaft because there's that thrust. See, everything else we've pressed, we've been pulling off the back of the shaft. Now when you get to second and third gear, it goes the other way. This thrust surface right here is part of the main shaft. So now it's opposite. Same deal, we're gonna use this sleeve and see how it clears the thrust, but it doesn't touch any of the teeth.
Are you gonna provide that one for sale?
Yeah, we can.
All right.
So here's our hub. This is right behind the input shaft, remember? We already took the keys out of it and we took that big snap ring out. Now there's one more on the back side that we have to take out. That's all there is to it. This hub, we didn't need to make any marks on it because there's a thrust surface here and there's no thrust surface here, and you can see where the snap ring used to be. So the way the transmission is put together, the input shaft is right in front of that, and there's a snap ring, so the case is holding that shaft forward. So there doesn't need to be a thrust between those. That's why there's not one. And then we have our synchro and our gear. And there's the needle roller bearing for third gear and our bare main shaft. All right, so the last thing we're gonna do is pull the input bearing off of the input shaft. There's a standard snap ring right there. There's our snap ring. Okay, so we're gonna use a standard bearing splitter. We're gonna use the flat side of it. Just go right underneath that. Come over here, right into our fancy box. That's it.
Easy peasy.
Bearing goes in the scrap bucket. Input shaft goes out to the cleaners. That's all.
Just like that, easy peasy.
Easy peasy, man.
All right, so all these parts are now also going to go into the cleaner. So we're going to pull the cases out of the parts washer. Look a lot cleaner than they were. Yeah, it's a lot cleaner. And then they put the parts over here and they use a pressure washer to knock off more of the grease and dirt. Now these parts are going to go into the parts washer. We're in the shop and they want to put a nice surface on here for the sealing, so they're going to put it on a sander and also clean up all the RTV. So this dowel pin needs to be removed first. Is that actually a dowel pin remover?
Yes.
That's a specialty tool. Okay, never seen one. What kind of tip did you do it to get inside those holes? It's a little cone-shaped tip. That's cool. Okay. So now he's going to put it on the belt sander. You got a nice machine surface there, nice and clean. Very nice.
When you're taking apart the transmission, a lot of times you end up prying the transmission housing apart. You put high and low spots, you put nicks in it. So the belt sander will take and make a smooth surface, take off any high spots, and then you'll get no oil leaks and a clean gasket surface afterwards.
Very nice. Once the part goes into the parts washer, it's pressure washed, it's cleaned up of the old gasket material, it's put on the belt sander to put a nice even surface. Now it goes into the bead blaster, also known as a sandblaster. So even though it went through the parts washer and pressure washing, you could see the difference. Look how much cleaner it is after the bead blasting compared to that. So the bead blasting does two things for Yota1. Number one, it gets the surface much cleaner, but it also makes the surface a little bit more porous, so when they paint it, the paint adheres to the surface really well and it leaves it with a really nice finish after they do several coats of paint on it. So this is actually gear oil staining that didn't come out from the cleaning, but the bead blaster will get that off. The bead blasting is a nice thing to do in addition to the general cleaning. And here's a contrast on the outside of the case. Look how clean it is, the area where he bead blasted, and look at this built up junk over the years that has adhered to the outside of the case. You just can't compare. The bead blasting is the way to go. So I know what you're thinking watching that process of someone who obviously is very comfortable tearing these things apart. You're thinking, this is pretty mind-boggling, and you might be having a little bit of an anxiety or a panic attack, but on the reassembly, Nick's going to take his time and show you how everything goes back together properly. So if your head is spinning, which mine is spinning a little bit, even sitting there filming and being able to be right there first person seeing the process, it is a little intimidating because there's a lot of parts that Nick showed how to remove. But when he puts everything back together, hopefully it's all going to make sense and jive with you, and you're going to be able to successfully do this rebuild on your R150F transmission. So join us in part 2 where we put the transmission back together with new synchros, new bearings, new seals, and we put it together with the nice and shiny painted cases, and you're going to see how nice this thing looks like when we're all done. Kind of like that.